Chris Hummer has released his latest all-impact team for the class of 2024. He describes it as a precursor to the preseason true freshman All-American team. So these are players he believes will make the biggest impact as freshmen. You've got guys like Nebraska's new 5-star quarterback, Dylan Raiola, and the #1 player in the class, Ohio State wide receiver Jeremiah Smith. So we showed you the list. Now we're going to show you the writer of this list. So let's welcome in national college football writer, Chris Hummer. Chris, so that's the list, but we are actually going to do something fun. We're going to play a little game of over-under, and we're going to start with the quarterback, Dylan Raiola. Last year, Nebraska, as a team, had just 10 passing touchdowns. So we're going to set the total at 10 touchdowns for Raiola this upcoming season. Where are you going, over or under?
Well, if they go under, it's going to be a problem in Nebraska for Matt Rule and company. So I'm going to go over. It would be hard to be much worse. Nebraska was one of the worst passing offenses in college football this year, but I think the future is much brighter with Dylan Raiola under center. He is an impetus for change. Certainly, he is the foundation of the future of the program. Obviously, a Nebraska legacy, a 5-star recruit, one of the top players in the country. But he's not the only reason I'm going over on this number. Nebraska's had an offensive coordinator change. A very controversial hire of Marcus Satterfield has been altered. He's no longer the offensive coordinator. He's now the tight ends coach. They've shifted their offensive system going into next year. Nebraska's recruited really well. I think they have some high upside wide receiver targets. Somebody like a Micah Coleman coming into his own in year 2 who could be a vertical threat. And I think Dylan Raiola really raises the ceiling of this offense, and I fully expect him to hit that over number in year 1 for passing touchdowns.
Yeah, Huskers fans are saying, better hit that over. They're hoping that this offense takes a leap forward. Let's go to Ohio State wide receiver Jeremiah Smith. We're going to set his total at 423 receiving yards because that's how many that Garrett Wilson had as a freshman. So where are you going? Over, under?
Over. I think my initial thought was under, right? You know, Quinshon Judkins coming in along with Travion Henderson. They're going to be a run-first offense, especially given that Will Howard, their new starting quarterback, can do a ton with his legs. But Jeremiah Smith's the #1 overall recruit in the country for a reason. He's the #1 overall recruit and receiver in 24/7 sports history for a reason. This guy's that special. Plus, there's a lot of targets to kind of take over. Marvin Harrison Jr.'s gone. Julian Fleming's gone to Penn State. Cade Stover's off to the NFL. There are targets to go around at Ohio State for the first time in forever, even with Micah and Buka back. So I like that over number with Jeremiah Smith. I think he's going to prove very quickly to be one of the most special wide receivers in the country.
Yeah, that's a tough one because you're talking about how great he is as a wide receiver, but you also have to take into consideration the options in that offense. It should be exciting. Run by Chip Kelly now. So there are a lot of great wide receivers in this class. We've talked about just the depth. So we want to do a few more wide receivers. Let's do Auburn's Cam Coleman. The Tigers' leading receiver last season was Javarius Johnson with 347 receiving yards. What you got? Over, under for Cam Coleman?
This is another one of those situations where it better be over, right? Like if Hugh Freeze's offense is going to work in 2024, their leading receiver has to be over 347 yards. And I think Cam Coleman has every ability to emerge as a true difference maker for Auburn in year 1. Auburn's had a good transfer portal target brought in from Georgia State and Robert Lewis, who I really like, but Coleman brings the highest ceiling of anybody on Auburn's roster at receiver. He's the deep threat that the team needs. Nobody on Auburn's team comes back who returns average more than 15 yards per catch next season. Cam Coleman can stretch the field vertically, and I think he's going to be a huge piece for the Tigers in year 1.
All right, one more pass catcher. Texas Tech wide receiver Micah Hudson. The Red Raiders were led in receiving last season by a Xavier White with 556 yards. What do you think of that total?
This is a tough one. I think it's going to be very close. I think Micah Hudson's going to have an immediate impact for Texas Tech, and it will be a big part of that offense. But I'm going to have to go under here. A slight under, but under. Texas Tech brought in Josh Kelly and Caleb Douglas via the transfer portal to be immediate impact players at wide receiver. I like both of them. I think they're going to be a huge part of that offense. And Texas Tech just tends to spread the ball around under offensive coordinator Zach Kittley. They've only had one wide receiver clear that 550-yard total over the last 2 years, and that was Xavier White this season. So this is an offense that tends to put the ball in a lot of people's hands. I think Micah Hudson's going to get plenty of chances to make an impact, but it's going to be hard to clear that 556-yard total in year 1.
Yeah, that's a much tougher number there. We had to throw in some harder ones, too. You're going over with everything, so we need some unders as well. Maybe here, Arizona running back Jordan Washington. Jonah Coleman, he led the Wildcats in rushing touchdowns with 5. So that is the total that we're setting here for Washington. Over or under 5 touchdowns?
Well, I don't want to continue the negativity, but let's continue it. I'm going under here. I think Jordan Washington is the type of player who's going to wow a lot of people this year as a true freshman. He is a truly elite speedster. He's posted multiple sub 10.5 second 100-yard dash times. He's one of the fastest people in California, period, not just football players, humans. He moves in a way that's really special for the running back position, and I think he is going to have a huge impact in year 1 for Arizona. But this is a pass-first offense led by Noah Fifita and the Arizona Wildcats. I think they're going to spread the ball around through the air. And Washington, who comes in at 170 pounds with a pretty slight frame, isn't exactly the prototypical goal line back. I think a lot of his chances will come outside the red zone.
All right, so that was the offense. Let's do some defense here. Texas edge Colin Simmons is the player. We're going to compare him to Ethan Burke, who led Texas in sacks last season with 5.5. So does Simmons go over or under?
I hate to keep being negative, but it's an under here. A Texas player hasn't had more than 5.5 sacks in a single season since Charles Omenihu did it back in 2018. It has been a very long time since Texas has had an impactful pass rusher who puts up huge individual numbers. And I think Colin Simmons can be that person for Texas eventually. He's a 5-star for a reason. He's the most talented edge rusher Texas has had on campus in a number of years. But it's going to be hard for him to reach that total in year 1. 1, because it just hasn't happened to Texas in a long time. And 2, there's a lot of mouths to feed on this defense. You mentioned Ethan Burke. He's back, and I think a lot of people are expecting another breakout campaign for him. Byron Sorrell is back, and so is UTSA transfer Trey Moore, who was the AAC Defensive Player of the Year next year. So it's going to be a tough ride for Colin Simmons to get over that number.
All right, real quick, one more defensive player. Florida defensive lineman LJ McCray. Last year's sack leader for the Gators was Princely Umanmielen. We're not going to compare him to last year's numbers, though. When he was a freshman, he had 2 sacks. So that's the number, over under 2 sacks for McCray.
I have to go under again. I know that sounds stupid with 2 sacks. It's not a huge number, but it's a harder number to get to than most people think. Only 2 Florida players cleared that bar last year, and the Gators plan to rotate heavily at DT this year on the interior with LJ McCray slotting into that rotation. So I think he's going to have a hard time getting there. I think he'll be a big part of the rotation, much like somebody like Gervin Dexter was for Florida in 2020, 5-star DT at the time for them. But Gervin Dexter only had half a sack that year. I think McCray's going to have a similar path. Somebody with a really huge upside, a high ceiling, but just have to grow into his frame and grow into the role over time.